Arnie, can you tell us about your involvement in Crickfish and Okanagan Fisheries?
The Canadian Columbia Intertribal Fisheries Commission was established by a few people like Chief Sophie Pierre and Chief Albert Saddleman. Back in the early 1980s, when other tribal groups were talking about economic development and land claims and those kind of things, people like Albert and Sophie consistently talked about fish. Being Okanagan and Shuswap and Kootenai, it was very important because the Columbia River Basin is the largest watershed in the world as far as having historically the capability of holding, all the kind of salmon, all the different kind of Chinook and sockeye and all those kind of species. And today there is no tributaries that have salmon-bearing fish from the ocean other than the Okanagan River in all of the Canadian side of the basin. So it was important to establish some sort of unity between the three tribes when you start talking about compensation and things like that. Because right now, realistically, the only tributary within the Columbia Basin watershed in Canada that can restore salmon to its original state, hopefully, is the Okanagan River. The Kootenays and Shuswaps, as far as the Columbia Basin is concerned, they're looking at a really uphill battle because of the dams. And I think that was one of the main reasons why the Canadian Columbia River Intertribal Fisheries Commission was established.
Arnie, can you tell me about your involvement in Crickfish?
Okay, the Canadian Columbia River Intertribal Fisheries Commission was established to get back the fish, get back the salmon into our traditional territories. And it's a group that's formed with an alliance of three tribal groups, the Shuswaps, the Okanagans, and the Kootenays. And the watershed that these three tribal groups are trying to protect is the Columbia River watershed, which just happens to be the largest watershed in the world that used to contain salmon in large amounts. I mean, it's the main one on the west coast anyway. And it was important at that time to come together as a group and start talking about restoring, restoration and conservation and enhancement work projects. And that's the mandate of Crickfish. And it's pioneered by two inspirational leaders, Chief Albert Saddleman of the Okanagans and Chief Sophie Pierre of the Kootenays, as well as Fred Fortier, Councillor Fred Fortier of the Shuswap Nation Fisheries Commission.
Can you tell me about your involvement in Okanagan Fisheries?
Okanagan Fisheries was actually, my involvement with that is working together with Chief Albert Saddleman to establish an Okanagan Fisheries Commission that could develop community-based mandates on restoration, enhancement, and conservation. And the thrust behind, or what makes us different from the Shuswaps and Kootenays, is that we are the only ones that can actually look forward to restoring salmon in the Columbia Basin in Canada, because we are the only tributary, which is the Okanagan River, that salmon are still coming up. They go as far as Oliver.
So through these developments and projects, do you think there's hope for future fisheries?
That's the object. That's why there is an Okanagan Fisheries Commission. We wanted to restore the salmon. I may not see it in my time, but hopefully that we can compete not only with restoration and conservation and enhancement projects, but we also have to attack legislation of the commercial sector that's continuing to, exhaust the resource. I mean, fishing legislation or conservation has to begin on the rivers, not out in the ocean. And all legislation, that's where it's at. Conservation it begins and ends in the commercial sector. And that's not what it's about, whether you're talking to DFO, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, or whether you're talking to the Aboriginal Fisheries Commission. Because the Aboriginal Fisheries Commission is heavily influenced by coastal native groups that their livelihood is the fish out in the ocean and at the mouth of the rivers. So while the interior Indians are fighting for conservation, restoration, and enhancement, no one else cares. We're on like an uphill battle, and we're fighting it politically on both ends with non-native politicians as well as native politicians.
What can you tell me about what has been allowed to happen with the water, like in the Columbia Basin and shed, that's contributed to the decrease in fish population?
Well, there's a lot of activity that has happened in the last, 100 years. I mean, without proper infrastructure, like within our Okanagan our part of the Okanagan Valley here, that contributes to the Columbia Basin watershed, things like sewage, things like logging practices that destroy watersheds, cattle tenures, where cattle are destroying the banks and walking through the creeks, and it starts right up from the top of the mountain all the way down into the water. I mean, I fly over here quite a bit, and I look out on the plain. You can just see the pollution and the residue along the sides of the lake, and it's just accumulating more and more and more. And with global warnings now, with like where we are in Osoyoos with the desert, the sockeye used to come up around July or sometimes even June. Now they're not coming up till the third week of August because they have to wait till the water cools down. And by that time when they come up, they're so beaten and damaged, they're not worth harvesting. And they're barely making their cycle, like they're barely spawning again. So we have to start with the watersheds, clean those up right away, and start fighting legislation on fixing the sewage and cleaning up our Okanagan Lake. And those are the challenges that we face as an Okanagan Fisheries Commission.
In your Okanagan Fisheries Commission, are you combining traditional knowledge with modern practices?
Yeah. One of the other challenges that we have in that aspect is that when you look at OK Falls Dam, you see a natural, or not OK Falls Dam, but OK Falls itself, you see a natural fish ladder. Like you see the rocks and the water flowing and falling. And people, like right now we're struggling with the Ministry of Fisheries with the province and DFO, because the Ministry of Fisheries with the province, they don't want us to build fish ladders around McIntyre Bluff Dam to allow salmon to go up into the tributaries along Okanagan Lake, where they used to. Like they used to go as far as Vernon and everywhere. Like there was salmon everywhere along these creeks. But what the province is saying is that there's a fish problem in the Okanagan Lake and there's a fish problem in the Osoyoos Lake. Putting the two problems together don't solve anything. So they're resisting our attempt to build those fish ladders around McIntyre Bluff Dam. They're saying, no way, you're not going to do it. As First Nations people, we're saying, baloney, we are going to do it, because we're trying to restock those resources into our traditional territory. So there's some challenges to our group that I think we're going to do good in it if we come together as tribal groups and fight it.